We're live, folks. I'm Seb 3.0, and today I'm chatting with my good friend, Patrick Perlmutter, who is co-founder of the Orb Project. We're going to be talking about a bunch of stuff today, like that Patrick and I have been talking together about for a long time, which is public goods funding using staking. And they're building it. They're building this really cool product that allows all sorts of cool stuff to be funded with staking rewards. And so we'll be diving deep into that, how it works. I'm also dying to find out why Patrick thinks that decentralization is not the goal. So we'll get into all that, but just before we get started, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and the like button to get notified when I go live every week. My guest, Patrick Perlmutter, is coming out next, right here on The Interrupt. Hey, buddy.
Hey, man. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. It's not often that I get to have like one of my closest friends on the podcast, so that's fun.
Yeah, and it's my first podcast, even though I've known you for like years and years and years.
Yeah. So yeah, how you been?
Been good. Just home for the holidays. Taking advantage of that.
Yeah. Good.
How about you?
Still home, but we'll be home-ish for the holidays tomorrow. So looking forward to that. So yeah, like, we've been talking about this for a long time. You and I, and also, your co-founder Sharon, who unfortunately couldn't be on because he's apparently, doing a little bit of a vacation right now. But it's something that I think is really interesting from a sort of philosophical point of view, but also like all the design challenges and the economics around what you guys are working on is something that I think like is super fascinating. And I've talked to a lot of people about it, and I hope that like we can have kind of a deep conversation here where like other people, my goal really here, because like I know you guys are working on this and it's still like kind of early in your product development, and my goal here is that hopefully like someone will watch this and be like, hey, this is cool, I want to get involved, or like I don't want to build on this, or maybe like even contribute to to you guys' thinking, and sort of contribute to all the work that you guys are doing on this cool idea. But first, for our listeners who don't know you, tell them a bit about yourself and how you got into crypto.
Yeah, so actually I got into crypto a long time ago, maybe in like 2011 or 2012, because you and a couple of other people I know were into it, and we were just kind of playing around with it. Buying it, paying each other to when we ordered pizzas, things like that. And then I just thought it was kind of a game at that point. I wasn't really like particularly serious about it. And then in 2017 or 2018, you took me to a Cosmos conference in Berlin. And I was like, wow, this has totally changed. This is a completely different world. So I kind of started getting a little bit more into it at that point, and discovering what DeFi was, and all these different things that kind of popped up, like DAOs, all these interesting products that were being built. And at that point, I was running an automation agency, so I didn't really have the bandwidth to begin building something in crypto. But about 2021, around August, I had an opportunity to take the leap. So we started building. I was really kind of obsessed with this whole idea of reputation at the time. So we started building a reputation system on Solana, which was just an incredibly interesting experience. And it kind of really got me into like the weeds of how all of this kind of actually works from a technical level, and what its benefits are to people that use these systems. And we could talk about reputation a little bit. I know it's not like the core of this conversation, but that's just fascinating topic in itself. But the public goods thing kind of came about a little bit earlier this year, when Sharon went to a conference in New York and had an opportunity to build a public good with Sushi, who's also one of our collaborators.
Your rise into crypto has been like pretty phenomenal to watch, because I remember in summer of 2021 we were hanging out together, at your house, and both like thinking about what to do next. And I wanted to also maybe like change career paths a little bit, like stay in crypto, but just it's like embark on a new journey. And you were also like really wanting to get into crypto. And then we went to Breakpoint together, like the first Breakpoint
Yeah.
in Lisbon, and also like Cosmoverse was happening around the same time. And then like from that conference, from then on, you were just like in crypto, and then you started making all these really cool connections, and you started like meeting all these people and like getting involved with the Solana folks, and then now like folks in Cosmos and Gnosis and just like all these ecosystems, and like learning and building something that I think could be really valuable once you guys decide to or once you guys get to launch it. So yeah, it's been fun to watch.
Yeah. It's been really interesting exploring all of these ecosystems because I never had like an affinity to one particular chain or ecosystem. So it's kind of, I mean, Breakpoint was kind of a mind blowing experience to me because it was another like one of these moments where you see all of this interesting stuff being built. I mean, there's a lot of controversy about Solana, obviously, but um, I mean, that doesn't really matter to me. It just seemed so advanced compared to what I originally knew about. And I took that advantage. I took the opportunity to learn about not just Solana, but IBC and Ethereum and all the differences between them, which is fascinating.
Yeah, yeah, and I think this is what's kind of unique also about like your journey is that since you have largely been, I think, un unattached to any of these ecosystems. For you, I feel like you look at them as just different technologies that offer different trade offs or whatever, or like it may have some particular benefits to building this type of product or this type of product, um and I feel like that's kind of a superpower because a lot of folks that are in the ecosystem are like quite vested, whether from from a financial perspective in these ecosystems, but there's also like all this emotional attachment to things that makes it difficult to like sort of see the forest from the trees, or like see that this tech is like not great for what I want to do, or like this other tech might be better or whatever. And so um yeah, I think like having that clarity and not having sort of presuppositions or biases is kind of a cool position to be in.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I see it a little bit that way. Yeah, it's for me what I found the most fascinating about it, beyond like the technical aspects, which are themselves fascinating, is the cultures that emerge like on each of these chains. Even within IBC, which has all these different chains, like the culture on each of these chains is so interesting. When you like hop on a governance call and you see how people talk and behave and
Yeah,
interact.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So you know what like your background as you worked as a product designer and for most of your career, how has that informed what you guys are doing and how you're building this product?
Yeah, I think that one of the way that we kind of approach all of this kind of all of what we're building is from an incentives design perspective. So like when you use a Web 2 application, they've been really well thought out to encourage you to engage in certain behaviors and certain actions, for better or for worse. And those kind of techniques I think can apply themselves really interestingly to economic systems. So what we're building in crypto. So I don't look at design as purely a visual thing, although I think it's really important, and I think you see drastic differences between applications across different ecosystems and chains. But to me, it's really about incentive design. So thinking about how the economics of all of this stuff will impact a user's behavior or psychology and how they perceive gains and losses and risk and all of that kind of stuff, is really core to how we go about building these things. What's really amazing about crypto just generally is that you can try and make systems where most people win. Obviously, not everyone can win. At least I don't think everyone can win. But you can craft systems where there's always a potential for upside, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah, yeah, totally. um so what got you interested in public goods funding? And I guess like maybe let's define what is a public good, because I think public goods in the software space and certainly in crypto space have evoke certain things. um if you think of public goods in the broader kind of societal sense, obviously it means very different things. So when we talk about public goods funding, what were we talking about exactly?
Yeah, I think drawing a parallel with what exists in the real world as public goods, whether it's a fire department or a school or something like that, really makes a lot of sense when you kind of take those analogies when you find the analogy in crypto. So basically, it's universally accessible tools, functionalities that aren't gated in any way to anyone that wants to use them. Um, they're most oftentimes community driven, or at least they're not run by private initiatives, and they create an overall kind of systemic benefit to the ecosystem that they're being built upon. So it could be something like you know uh, a shared GitHub repository that different people can contribute to, like an open source project, basically. It can also be educational content. So if a blockchain, for example, wants to fund an initiative to create, docs for developers, or educational content around how to use a particular DeFi application, whatever. All of those things are universally accessible and benefit the ecosystem more widely. We try not to, like, when we talk, at least when Sharon and I talk about public goods, we try not to constrain the definition too much, because we think of that it's kind of good to give a little bit of flexibility to what could be considered a public good. But basically, anytime that profit enters the equation, then that's sort of when the question gets, that's when we ask the question of whether or not this is actually a public good or not, which is also incredibly nuanced, right? Like, if you drop tokens to 10,000 people, is it a public good or not? I mean, it could be, right? It depends on the profit mechanism there, and like how people are going to use that tool, and if they're going to gate it in some way. So I'd be muted.
Yeah, I think that in the context of blockchains, public, like, blockchains themselves can be seen as public goods. There are a type of infrastructure that anybody can use. They're meant to be open and permissionless, or at least most blockchains are. Um, the services or the value that they provide, flow back to whoever wants to use them. Um, I think from that perspective, they're like a little bit different than what you would, at least for now. I mean, like, because it's such a crypto is also a very niche thing, at least for the moment. It doesn't have widespread adoption in the same way that something like the internet has, or would you say like park benches have widespread adoption? But like the potential users for this stuff is remains limited. And so maybe there's a quality to public goods, which is the number of people who use it, or their general usability in the public sphere. Could be a quality that helps define whether or not something is a public good. But then also you can, like, maybe you use that sort of in sort of like restrained kind of namespace or context. But when thinking about blockchain ecosystems themselves, what typically gets put into this public goods bucket?
Yeah, for the most part, it's open source projects and educational content. Those are the two things that we see like most often. The idea of a blockchain as a public good makes a lot of sense. I think that there's a lot of ambiguity around that too. So like who gets block rewards? What do they do with them? What kind of wealth distribution does that kind of create? Where does the power structure of like of a blockchain ecosystem look like? And is it in fact really a public good? It's a question of decentralization in my mind, and also how these block rewards are being used effectively. Like, in order to finance public goods, you need, I mean, I don't really like calling it this, but you need some sort of like a tax mechanism. People need to be able to collectively fund things that are beneficial to everyone else. And I
There's
think that
also a governance. There's also like a governance component to it, right? Because, like, if you're saying, "Hey, we're going to fund this content," I don't know. Like, I wouldn't think it was public good funding if people were funding me, like, for producing content, because I'm a profit driven individual, and like, also I own this content, and I own the IP to it, and I own the copyright and everything.
mhm.
Um, I think there is some aspect of like, how do we govern the distribution, or like how is like the governance of this thing um, managed? Is it really open, or does it remain in the hands of few, or this kind of thing?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that um, you might be called upon to create or produce a public good, even though that like the interop is not itself a public good. And oftentimes that's the case, right? Like they're like one-off projects. They're not necessarily like ongoing long-term initiatives. Although
Yeah.
they can be, of course. But um, that's why I think it's cool to have like this sort of like loose definition about what a public good could actually entail, because you can have private actors that create public goods as well.
Yeah. I as we're talking about this, it feels like there are things in the blockchain ecosystem that people might try to pass as public goods, or might try to, yeah, pass as public goods, while there are in fact, not public goods. They're just, they might be valuable, like, just, I think it's helpful to maybe not construe public good with like something of value, that to like a broad audience, which
Yeah.
I think sometimes there is maybe a blurry line, at least in crypto, about those two types of things.
I think we'll probably get into this in our conversation, but I think if you ask anyone from a grants program what a public good looks like, they'll probably like raise the same concern, right? Is what you're actually going to fund through a grant worth funding as a public good, and does it actually represent something that provides large benefit or sort of like broad benefit to the entire ecosystem? And that's a question that I think that most grants programs at least struggle with. Although I think that we're kind of evolving. I mean, from what I see, we're evolving out of this dynamic a little bit, where people don't necessarily spontaneously apply for grants, although of course that will always exist, I think.
Mm,
But rather that needs are sourced from the community and kind of formulated as a request for a proposal, and that is actually a representation of a broad need in a community. And anyone who wants to provide a public good can then respond to an RFP.
right. So let's get into then, what are the roles? I mean, you mentioned before the call here that different ecosystems have, and I know that you've been kind of, peering into different ecosystems. You mentioned Solana. No, I know you guys have been talking with people on the Gnosis side. You're also quite active on Evmos, and I wonder how those different ecosystems view public goods or think about public goods funding. Are there real differences?
I think that the funding mechanic is fairly similar across all of these chains, but how they perceive the benefit of investing in public goods is pretty different, because they're all at different stages of evolution with different, economic contexts. So if you take Evmos, for example, it's a fairly
Mm,
early chain. Um,
yeah,
it still has like, a pretty high TVL for such an early chain, but
you
there's
think
not a
it's
lot.
Evmos is high TVL?
I mean,
Okay.
relatively speaking, it did, I guess. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
um, uh, but like they're like right now their incentive is to bring builders onto the chain to begin like really building like you know uh, applications, um, and open source projects, and even just like developer docs, right? Like
yeah,
it's quite difficult. Same thing on Solana. Like Solana's got some history, but if you want to build something using like the like using realms or something, there's a team that supports realms, but the documentation around realms is pretty non-existent for the most part. And so
Sorry,
like
Realms is like their DAO tool.
yeah, it's like a DAO tool. It's
Yeah.
like DAO on
Okay.
IBC. Um, so there's a team that supports it, but if you want to try and use, let's say, two token voting on realms, there's like zero documentation around how to implement two token voting on realms. And so while they're able to finance building, they may not have all of the supplementary or complementary stuff that actually goes around what they're financing in terms of build. Um, Whereas Gnosis is really, really evolved. They launched their grants program, I think, about a year ago.
Yeah.
Um, and so they've learned from all of the other grants programs that have existed on in the Ethereum space for a really long time. So they kind of have an idea of what of how they should be going about it. I think there's some VCs on the grants program as well. So it's, they have a pretty solid view of what the ecosystem needs and how they want to go about building grants. Whereas on Solana, it's like super centralized. On Evmos, it doesn't exist. In fact, we've applied to do grants on Evmos. So yeah, it's pretty stratified.
Yeah, Gnosis, I think, has also like, quite a lot of resources to have a team, behind our grants program. They also have like years of experience around, say, like DAO governance and things of this nature. I think like they're fairly well placed to, it's not a surprise that like their grants program is like well structured and like from a tooling perspective, but also from like a human perspective. And what are the roles of? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say they're very competent.
Yes, they are very competent. Actually, like Federica was on here last week. So what's the role of foundations typically in this whole, public goods grants program business? And I guess, are foundations roles primarily just public goods funding in your view, or are they meant to serve some other function?
I would say more like generally, a foundation's goal is to not exist. So it's kind of a means to an end. So if you talk to any lawyer that sets up a foundation for a crypto project or a chain, one of the big concerns they have is the dissolution of the foundation itself, because the ultimate goal is for the foundation to kind of disappear and for the ecosystem to be able to run itself. I think that with grants, we see that pretty often. So you can go to pretty much any chain. I'm not saying it's all chains, but a lot of chains don't really want to run their own grants program because it creates a lot of overhead for the foundation, and it kind of engages them in an activity that's a long-term activity. Ideally, what they would like to do is decentralize that mechanism, and kind of not have to deal with grants and let the community decide what receives funding. That's like a very difficult goal to achieve, I think, in the short term, and it kind of requires a centralized mechanism to start, because who's going to put in place these processes, who's going to lay the foundation or the groundwork for all of this. And but I think ultimately the goal is to have the community take it over, and I think there's different ways of doing that. Right now, like Gitcoin released Gitcoin protocol, right? The idea here is that any chain can use Gitcoin protocol to run a Gitcoin style grants program. How decentralized that mechanic is from a technical perspective can vary. Although, like with quadratic funding and everything, like they try and accurately reflect a community's point of view, but the actual funding mechanic, where the money comes from and everything, is still, I think, fairly centralized. I think that's where maybe we can bring a little bit more innovation to how all this kind of works. You're muted again.
Yeah, in the intro, I said that you thought decentralization is not the goal. And this is when I asked you what your most contrarian view was. This is what you told me. I still don't know what you mean by that. So why do you say that decentralization is not the goal? What's the whole idea here?
Okay, to me there are like two types of decentralization. There's the technical decentralization, and I wouldn't question that. I think that is in and of itself a goal, and I think that that's what a lot of this space is striving for right now. I think it kind of gets mixed up with social decentralization, which is the human mechanic, the governance mechanic around a lot of what's being built in crypto. And I do think that makes sense for a lot of projects, say like public goods or open source projects, blockchains themselves. But there are a lot of initiatives that don't necessarily need to be decentralized. Creating decentralization also creates complexity without necessarily getting rid of the whole idea of hierarchy. So even though you can have all these different voices talking eventually, and this is, I think anyone who has participated in a DAO or in governance can see that there are certain people that are leaders versus others that are either followers or listening in or just participating. So I don't think that decentralization at the social level is necessary, although I do think that it's a means to an end. So for just to be a little bit more precise about that, what I mean is like, for example, if you airdrop tokens to a bunch of different people based on their on-chain activity, you're effectively decentralizing a new protocol or a new blockchain, right? That's still a means to an end. You're just discharging the legal obligation of a centralized entity by doing that, and you're obfuscating it in some way, and that's the end, really, right? But if you want to have like um, effective if you want to build effectively, it may not be the best way to have decision making work because decision making is going to be long. It's going to have to go through these processes where there's a discussion and then a proposal and then a vote and then the actual implementations. So it slows things down. And that's fine. It just depends on the context. So for me, it's just a tool. It's not an end.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that, and I think this came up a lot in the Atom 2.0 discussion, right? This idea that there would be these councils that would effectively be awarded some chunk of the treasury that they could then spend or invest in projects, uh, within specific, I guess, like niches, right? So like kind of like a sub DAO model where each sub DAO is tasked with, say, funding marketing or funding like some specific piece of infrastructure, like the Cosmos SDK or whatever. And I think overwhelmingly, like, most people recognize that um, doing the kind of due diligence that one needs to be effective at funding public goods is not best. The sort of wisdom of the crowd mechanism doesn't work best in this type of scenario. And that what works best is when you have domains, people with a high level of domain expertise that look at projects and then decide on some criteria that they've established, whether or not those are good projects to fund. Maybe that gets replaced by some kind of you know AI driven decision making tool process in the future, but in the same way that you have like AI driven funds, right? It's like there are funds that do have some kind of AI component to their due diligence. But what we want decentralization of the governance and the governance technology that allows these committees, these councils, or these bodies to to be voted and revoked if the community deems their work to be of little value or worse, um, and to be promoted when they do good work. And so I think this is what we need. What we really mean when we say decentralization is like we want to decentralize the framework. We want to decentralize the framework that allows essentially a form of democracy to exist. And I kind of overlap that on top of existing governance and sort of democracy, right? Like frameworks, um, and see those as somewhat flawed because there there isn't a strong enforcement mechanism that allows all of the rules of those democracies um, to be enforced, and like we see this, in sort of like everyday in our everyday lives with like government and things of this nature, right? Like um, democratic society, and but we still need as long as we don't have like artificial intelligence that can replace human decision making, we still need the humans making decisions and taking and being leaders, etc. So I think it's helpful for people to recognize that there are different like there are different things that we need to decentralize, and people is not necessarily one of those things, at least not yet.
Let me ask you something. I mean, like over the past year or so, I've heard this like word or this phrase thrown around a bit. It's true decentralization. Does that mean anything to you?
uh I could take a guess. I guess maybe what people mean by that is they probably mean like some system where some system by which, but whereby miraculously somehow we've been able to fix civil resistance while maintaining decentralized anonymous identity, and people are very kind of involved in voting, and there is a high voter turnout, and we're able to make decisions like very effectively. Is that what that means?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's like I think it's up for anyone's definition. I just hear it a lot.
Okay,
But
I think that's what people probably mean. They probably like imagine this world where that doesn't exist right now. Like, I mean, like, I think one of the big issues with governance, at least, in the decentralized blockchain world, is the problem of civil attacks, and we haven't figured this problem, like how to fix this problem um, without central authorities that or like, I don't know, not coincidentally, another project called the Orb that that tries to do this this retina scanning thing. We did an episode on Epicenter for those interested with the Orb, but yeah, like if you don't have effective identity mechanisms, it's very hard to do this in a way that's reliable.
yeah, I would totally agree with that.
Yeah. What do you think true decentralization means?
I don't know. I mean, to me, like I like to think of maybe exactly what you're talking about, but I would put a different term on it. I call it like perfect decentralization, rather than true decentralization. Like if you imagine the most perfect world of decentralized organization, it would probably resemble something that close to like what you described. To me, true decentralization would be whatever we want it to mean in a particular context, which is kind of what I'm trying to what I would like to promote, which is um, if you have 50 people that are able to make effective decisions in a decentralized way where they each have some share of voting based on some criteria, um, then that to me could be true decentralization as much as like 10,000 people engaging in this mechanism. Um, it just depends on the context and what the goals of the organization are.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I think there is some. I mean, like nature tells us, and also social kind of, our social systems, that if you want efficiency, you probably want some amount of hierarchy. Um, I don't know. I'm no social scientist, but I think that's probably true, or anthropologist or whatever. Like, I'm not even a philosopher, so I have no idea what I'm talking about. But yeah, I think this is probably the case, and it also applies here. Like even in protocols that are, I'd say, fairly decentralized in their um, organizationally speaking. So take something like Juno, right? Like Juno Juno is very organic, right? Like it came together in a very organic way. It doesn't have like this VC funding. I don't know if there's even like a company. I guess I'm not quite sure there, but like those people are pumping out code and like pumping out features faster than just about anybody in the ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
But there is no real like centralized leadership. But there are leaders. Like there
Yeah.
are leaders, and there are people who lead. The ecosystem and the teams and whatever. Like there is hierarchy in that system. It's not a flat organization as much as people want it to be or believe it might be. But there are people who are sort of like leading the charge, um, and being leaders. Like that's what leaders do, right? Like they sort of inspire people to do things, and like and this is what like guys like Jake have been really good at, is like being very prolific leaders that inspire people to build things, and so that has allowed them to be very effective at pumping out all kinds of code into production, and like DAO and all that stuff. Like it's like moving very fast and much faster than other chains and other ecosystems that have all this VC funding and so on. So yeah, hierarchy, man, it works.
It does work.
So yeah, I want to talk about this staking thing that you guys are working on. And so this is an idea that came about quite a while back now, I think, and like we've been chatting about this, I know, for quite some time, and it's this idea that one can leverage their staking rewards, or at least a part of their staking rewards, to fund public goods, right? So when you stake, you get some rewards, right, for securing the chain or participating in securing a blockchain. So if you're on Cosmos, or like any Cosmos chain, you'll get staking rewards. If you participate in liquid staking, you'll also get some staking rewards there, although the tokenomics are a little bit different here. But you do get some rewards, and people are used to some amount of APY here. The idea is to say, hey, we're going to allow you as a delegator to stake your tokens, and then you get to decide some percentage, right? Could be 10%, 5%, could be 100% of what you would normally get. Let's say you get 20% on a chain, right? Well, you'll give half of that. You'll give like 10% to some public goods funding thing. So it could be a DAO, it could be a grants program, or it could be directly to some thing that you want to fund. And then the rest of the rewards go to you. So you still get half your rewards. You're still happy. You still get something, but you get to also do something good with that kind of free money that you'd be getting anyway. So yeah, I know like the last time we chatted about this is where you were at, and yeah, is that sort of still accurate, or has it evolved since then?
I think that like there's like a theoretical way this works, which is you laid it out like perfectly, and then there's the practical way of like how to actually build a product that people can engage with to do this. So like if you look at liquid staking today, it's pretty straightforward, right? You deposit your tokens, you get a synthetic asset, and you kind of move on with your life. There's not so much, you don't really have to think about how the yield gets accumulated or anything like that. You just, when you unstake, you get the yield that goes along with it, and bada bing, bada boom. When you're thinking about using yield or block rewards in a different way, there's all these different questions that kind of come about. So, for example, if you're giving a portion of your yield to fund public goods in any of the ways that you described, how does the synthetic asset work in that case? What's the value of the synthetic asset? If you create a synthetic asset, and then the second part of that is if you're donating to, or if you're let's stay away from the word donating, because it can be donating and it can be funding depending on the context. If you're using your rewards to fund projects, what sort of governance do you get in exchange for what you're giving in terms of the amount of funding? So what sort of governance mechanism might you be able to develop around this? And if you're doing this both with the synthetic and the ability to govern, who is the yield accumulating to? Is it accumulating to the synthetic asset holder, or is it accumulating to the original staker? And what are the consequences of that? So there's all these like questions that arise when you try and build out this mechanism that are kind of difficult to answer. And this is sort of what we're playing around with right now. Is we're just experimenting with all these different systems and how they might work in practice. I think that right now, like the whole reason we kind of embarked on this idea, or we wanted to build out this idea, is because right now, if you want to take risk in crypto, you basically have to do some capital outlay. You're basically putting your existing position at risk. So I have to spend money to make money, or I have to invest money to make money. If you think about using block rewards to do that rather than your principal or the capital that you already have, you can limit your downside because you know that your downside will always be whatever capital you're already holding, and you just use your block rewards to invest. And so this is kind of like a way to hedge your bets a little bit. Obviously, like your block rewards don't amount to nearly as much of the capital that you might have at the outset, but it does allow you to have some flexibility in managing your risk a little bit better. So that was the original theory, and everything kind of beyond that is all like technical mechanics about how to build this sort of system and what the user experience looks like.
So yeah, I'm not quite sure I get this whole risk management thing, because I mean, like, staking is a fairly low risk
Mm-hmm.
uh, activity. What is the risk that one is hedging against when performing this strategy?
Yeah, so like if you so you can stake, of course, and that's like a really low risk um, investment, let's call it. Let's say you take your synthetic asset and you lend it on a lending protocol, right? At some point, if you want to unstake, let's say it's like a bear market and a lot of people want to withdraw their stake, you have to go out and
Okay.
purchase that
Yeah.
synthetic asset again to be able to unstake. So you're taking on
Sure.
this risk. And if you're not
Yeah.
engaging in liquid staking, then you're using your base assets. You're risking those assets. If you're just risking your block rewards, then you don't really have so much um, as much downside.
I mean, you're talking about leverage. I mean, you're talking about, yeah. If you take those synthetic derivatives and then leverage them in order to lend some stable coin or some other assets, there you're taking a risk. Do you know about some of these other? So there are a couple of teams in the ecosystem right now that are like. So there's like Nolus. They're doing essentially leases, right? So you can get a loan for so I can't remember how it works exactly, but basically you're getting a lease, and like, say you want to buy like atoms with USDC, or actually no, I'm not quite sure how that works. But anyway, basically you get a loan where part of the loan actually is kept as collateral and staked until the principal has been paid off. So it's like essentially a lease to buy cryptocurrency, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then there's another project that I sort of come across, and it's called Intrastake, and they do lending with staking asset as collateral. So you take out a loan, and the loan pays for itself with the staking rewards. So
Oh,
essentially,
cool.
using like your staking position as collateral,
Yeah.
and it pays for itself, which is kind of like, yeah, I mean, why not? Why would it sort of like removes the layer of abstraction, which would be to, I mean, you could do this if there were lend borrow markets on staking assets, which there certainly are, like in the ETH world.
Mm-hmm.
You could effectively do the same thing, but they're building it as a product. Um, how does that like, mechanisms like this play into what you guys are doing? Is that I mean, effectively it's the same thing, right? Like you're sort of using this staking asset, this revenue generating asset, to generate some amount of money, that some capital that goes to a public good or a DAO or like a funding mechanism.
Yeah, yeah. So I think like the general way to think about this is basically using block rewards as to pay subscriptions, where a subscription in this case would be paying off a loan, or um, you're subscribing to an investment fund by basically just every month or every epoch you're like contributing yield to a fund, or even like if someone wants to charge a subscription in ETH or a subscription in Atom or Evmos or whatever, you can use your yield to basically finance that subscription. Um, and I think that that's sort of like the general umbrella that all of this might fall into. But what's very clear is that a lot of people are really conscious about how block rewards can be used differently, and even the sources of revenue or the sources of yield. So like traditional, so there's a really interesting. I'm sure this exists on Ethereum. I just don't know what it's called. But in Solana, there's a liquid staking provider called Jito, They started out by creating MEV software for validators. What they do is now they have a set of validators um, that generate revenue from MEV, and distribute that revenue back as staking rewards. So not only are you getting block rewards, but you're getting a boost in your block rewards because the MEV is coming back to you as a staker. So that's like a
Yeah.
revenue, it increases the amount of revenue you're generating from staking. And then there's the outlay, which is all the subscription stuff that we're talking about. So it's just I think that there's something happening. There's something brewing around staking right now, because it's a really reliable way of both accumulating capital and spending that capital, or using that capital.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up MEV here, and I think there's also sort of something brewing here as well, where, yeah, I feel like, I mean, this is sort of a little bit off topic, but when looking at the way the ecosystem is evolving, I think that I think that app chains are going to play a fairly important role in the ecosystem moving forward. So I was reading this article earlier today. I have it here still, but yeah, the inevitability of Unichain, by Dan Elliser of Nascent, and what he's arguing here is, like, he's saying, look, it's inevitable that big protocols, like big massive protocols on L1s, are going to move to application specific blockchains. Like, they're going to want to become their own chains. They'll probably have outposts on other chains. This is kind of what Osmosis is doing. They have their own chain, but they plan on having outposts on other chains that allow you to access liquidity on the main chain. Mm-hmm. And the argument for this is, the argument that he lays out, which I think is pretty interesting, is as a user of this app, right? So as a trader of on Uniswap, on Ethereum, you have to pay basically 3 fees. You got your swap fee, you have the network fee, and you have the MEV. And any centralized exchange, a user of a centralized exchange only has to pay the swap fee. They don't have to pay this network fee, or like get like super high slippage, or basically like have value extracted from each trade with MEV. And his argument is that, or I don't remember if he argued this, but the way I see it is, in a world where we have app chains, where app chains get to provide more value to their users by being more cost efficient, and also through MEV bring value back into the protocol, the Uniswaps and the compounds that are on Ethereum layer 1 are not going to be able to compete with those protocols. So they're either going to lose in relevance, or they'll have to change and they'll have to go on their own chain. And that's sort of like, then begs the question of MEV, and what the place that MEV then sort of takes in terms of allowing chains to fund things within their ecosystem. So, mm-hmm. So I think that with Osmosis, this has been what's been discussed, and what Sunny has talked about, is like, let's internalize, let's eliminate a lot the MEV that we can eliminate through batching and stuff like that. But the MEV that we can eliminate, let's try to internalize it in the protocol. Let's build it into the protocol, such that those funds can then flow back, to provide value for users by like investing in like, new features, or like paying a dividend or whatever, right? And I think that it's like, I think it's an interesting shift in terms of business models for blockchains. Yeah,
it's fascinating. I didn't know about any of that, so it's really interesting.
I'll show you I'll put the link to that article in the show notes. It's a really good article. It was written like a couple months ago, but yeah, so yeah, like as people start leveraging their staking rewards to do other things than just, like restake, which I think is what most people do. Like probably most people just restake or sell their staking rewards, like, and take profit.
Hmm.
As we move towards, well, hopefully, a world where a portion of staking rewards are used to fund things, what do you think that looks like? And, you know, where does that money go? Does it go to DAOs? Does it go to, it's like back to foundations such that they can then allocate that capital? Like, where does the money go from there?
I think like anyone who participates in this mechanism will want to have some level of ownership, whether it's direct ownership or indirect ownership over how those funds are used. So there's different ways of imagining like how this could work. So you could have this go into a grants program, like a sort of a decentralized grants program, and then have people vote on how that money gets allocated specifically for, say, public goods, right? In that case, you don't really expect a return from your investment. You're just expecting that whatever you're putting money into benefits the ecosystem more largely, and it's kind of like a feel good thing, right? Like it's Gitcoin esque, if you will. But you can also imagine like having decentralized funding mechanisms for startups or for dApps or whatever anyone can come up with. In which case, like you're putting money into this fund, that fund gets allocated to a project, and then I don't know, 6 months down the road or a year down the road, you get an airdrop from that project, and so you get not only do you get your staking yield, but you also get any potential airdrops because you participated in the early financing of these projects. I don't know to what extent yet that this can disrupt traditional financing models or traditional funding models like VC models or angel or seed models or whatever. But potentially it could be a new way for projects to raise funds directly from the community rather than having to take on private investment at the outset. There is some nuance to this. So if 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 the token, so when you're participating in this, right, if a lot depends on the price of the token and the APY. Both of those factors are important because it ultimately determines the dollar value of the funds that are the total amount of funds that are being raised. And then there's a time factor. So if you have like a low token price of like, say it's like $1 at 7% APY, it's going to take a lot of time before enough yield accumulates to be able to make some interesting like financing decision. Whereas if you have 300% APY and your token is worth, I don't know, $6, then that gets you to the point where you can fund a lot of projects really quickly without having to wait for all this yield to accumulate. It becomes, in dollar terms, it's really interesting. Or if you have a token worth like $1,500 and the APY is 5%, it's the same thing, right? Like even though the APY is low, in dollar terms, you're able to raise enough funds to be able to make interesting things happen. So in the app chain perspective, especially for newer chains in the Cosmos ecosystem, they often offer like really high APYs to start to incentivize people to come to those chains. So they're like great candidates to start to implement this sort of like decentralized funding mechanism because the APY is so high. And sometimes, I mean, obviously right now things are a little bit depressed, but in better times when the token prices are a little bit higher, it could be like a really interesting mechanism to fund an IBC. Those are sort of the mechanics of like how I think all this will kind of end up working.
Where are you guys planning to deploy this right now? Like, what's the roadmap to launching the first product, and where do you hope to launch it?
So there are two aspects of this. One is the chains that we choose to launch it on, and the other is the partnerships that we're able to develop. So our reputation system that we were building previously was on Solana, is on Solana. It still exists and anyone can use it. It's an open source project. So we have a lot of connections on Solana, and it's an easy ecosystem for us to integrate with. So we're working with Marinade there, who's the largest liquid staking provider on Solana. The way that this works is it's a layer on top of Marinade. So we're not going to rebuild all the liquid staking, infrastructure and smart contracts. We're going to partner with Marinade, or we are partnering with Marinade to be able to make this happen. We're also going to use quadratic funding in the governance mechanism to allow people to vote in a for funding decisions to take place in a way that better represents the community's voice. So for that, we're planning on using Gitcoin protocol. We're doing some like very, very big basic implementations to start. But that's the idea, is to rely on all of the infrastructure that already exists that people trust to be able to facilitate this. And then we're going to build it on Evmos as well. Well, it's going to be an EVM compatible version, so we'll start it on Evmos. But the idea is that any EVM compatible chain could deploy this, and then we'll see how IBC. I mean, we love the IBC ecosystem. Like what people are building there is really, really interesting. It's still a little bit early, so in terms of liquid staking, for example, so that we have a goal to build there, but maybe not immediately.
You mentioned reputation, and yeah, when I think about this, one of the things that comes to mind is how do we leverage the on-chain data and the actions, right? So like the intention and the action of donating part of your staking rewards. How do we use that as information that allows us to make decisions later about, say, like, lending, right? But essentially, how do we use it as a way to attest reputation based on, on like virtuous behavior, I guess. And I know you've been thinking about reputation for a long time, and you guys have built this reputation system on Solana. Yeah, how does that fit into all this?
Okay, it's kind of like it's a very deep and loaded question. There are two,
we got
like,
time, man.
There are two aspects of reputation. There's like the source of reputation, and then how reputation is interpreted. So reputation can be on-chain, and most people would like to consider on-chain reputation first. The problem with that is basically unifying reputation under one identity. So how the DID plays in. On Solana and Ethereum, there's a project called Civic that we work with to basically facilitate this reputation paradigm, where it's like, you want to associate everything to a unique identity. How people or ecosystems or chains or dApps or whatever want to interpret reputation is kind of up to them. Like how you want to value a particular action shouldn't be controlled by anyone. There should be no like points value or anything assigned to a specific action universally. If I decide to lend on Solend in Solana, Solend might interpret all of my wallet's history in some way that is different than if I decide to, I don't know, like do something else, like, okay, I join a DAO, right? And I want to participate in the governance of that DAO. How that DAO sees my entire history is going to be very different, and then issue me like rewards or roles or access or authority or whatever is going to be very different than how Solend interprets my wallet's history. What I think is kind of interesting is combining off-chain reputation with on-chain reputation, which requires a sort of like on-ramp for all these off-chain things that are happening. That's part of the protocol that we've designed. You can have off-chain attestations submitted and go through a validation process using a multi-sig. So I don't know. Basically, the answer to your question is that there is no answer. It's all up for interpretation. The most important thing is just creating a set of interactions that represent whatever you want to consider reputation to be, and then assigning some value to that, either on aggregate or based on individual actions.
Yeah, I feel like, I have this this kind of conviction that and I didn't think of this. This is something I read, right? So like Nick Grossman wrote this article a couple of years ago about how technology evolves in these infrastructure and application cycles, right? Where you have infrastructure applications that inspire infrastructure that inspire applications, etc. And like, I feel like the infrastructure for attestation attestation infrastructure essentially is kind of mature. Like there's all sorts of attestation type services, and POAP is a very simple example, right? It's like it
Hmm.
tests that you are part of some community, or you've done something, you've been somewhere and met someone, and like you can infer things from that. And then there's like Git POAP, and there's all this other kind of attestation stuff that, and to some extent, like NFTs are also a little bit of you attestation that you're a part of a community. And I feel like that infrastructure is there. It's mature, and that in the next kind of application cycle, in the next 2 to 3 years, that people are going to use that to do really cool things. And I don't know what that is yet. Like, folks have been talking about leveraging attestation and kind of reputation to do under collateralized lending, so like financial things. But I feel like there's like a pressure cooker of really interesting applications and use case that people will start building using this on-chain data. What do you think some of those things could be? Have you given any thought to what these applications could be?
Yeah, I mean, more than thought, there are like DAOs or apps that we've spoken with about putting in place these reputation systems. It's still really early. Like, there's this whole identity piece that's still kind of missing a little bit.
Yeah. Well,
But
we come back to the identity problem. Yeah.
One of the biggest thing that we see anywhere is governance. So if you want credible people to participate in the governance mechanism, and such that you don't necessarily want to give the same weight to someone that goes out, buys a bunch of tokens, and begins participating in governance and influencing things in a DAO that aren't aligned with that DAO's mission. That's sort of like the number one thing. So actually, a great example of this is what happened on Mango Markets. So someone basically manipulated an oracle, acquired a bunch of tokens, and then passed a proposal for them to be able to withdraw a bunch of money from the protocol. So like that shouldn't be. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's a deeper. You have to think deeply about how to prevent something like that. It's not just like, oh, a reputation system solves for this problem, but using reputation could be an interesting way to prevent something like that from happening. So I think governance is like a huge piece of this. Under collateralized lending is another big aspect of this, and there's different ways of doing that. So like who is going to give you a loan, for example, and in what denomination will that loan actually occur? So let's say I'm part of GrapeDAO, right? If I go to Grape and I have a high reputation, maybe I have a specific token for reputation, and I can use that reputation token as collateral to take a loan out directly from Grape, right? In Grape.
Yeah.
So you keep this like under collateralized lending system in the context of a specific community, because the DAO itself has funds that it might be able to lend to its users, which is the case for a lot of DAOs. Or if you want to make it more broad, and I want to take a loan out from someone I don't know, maybe it's individualized loans and it's not going through like a pool of capital, right? There's all these different ways of imagining how under collateralized loans might work. And then more generally, one we really like is for airdrops. It's like, it's just because you participated in this DeFi app and you lent here and you staked here and you did this and this and this, does that really make you qualified to get an airdrop that then leads to you having governance power? Maybe it's specific actions that you want to incentivize. In which case, like, why not go all the way towards interaction-based yield rather than stake-based yield? I don't know. There's like all these different ways of thinking about how to integrate reputation into the accumulation of financial value, which could in the future perhaps be more correlated with governance power, where you're not so ready to sell off your tokens because they also have some representation of your weight in a community or your governance power in a community. And your choice to participate in that community, really.
Yeah, I think like the biggest issue here will remain, and probably at least for like the next few cycles, is the identity aspect. And I really think we haven't quite cracked that nut yet. Um,
We need
yeah.
to create the right incentives for people to want to participate in identity. Like, why would anyone just connect their wallets to one did for no reason, right? Like, what
Oh,
benefit do
people
you
do
get out
this
of that?
all. I mean, people do this all the time. I mean, like, the other issue with this is, and I tweeted about this earlier because ICNS, which is this Cosmos like interchain name service, just came out, and like people are like, and as they should be because it's cool, right? Say, hey, I want to have like my own
Sure.
Cosmos domain name, kind of ENS, sort of like ENS, and it's like, I don't know, 10,000 people already have registered these things. And I was like, guys, this is cool, but hey, by the way, that by registering your ICNS name, you're effectively disclosing your past, present, and future transactions, and there's no going back. And sure, you can choose not to dox yourself, and you can create like another wallet with another identity, or like another name or something like that. But like, well, first of all, sure, but you don't know what say future governments or companies will be able to do with the information there. Also, it's really hard not to dox yourself because you have to send funds to the address that's registering the domain in order to pay for the fees. So this is a problem people had with ENS, but a lot of folks would do a Tornado Cash transaction, start a new address fresh, have the fees there so they could pay for it. But the thing is that like most people don't recognize this. Like, yeah, I was sort of writing in this tweet that like Tyler that listens to BitBoy Crypto, and nothing against guys named Tyler, it's just a common name, but like that guy heard BitBoy Crypto talk about Atom a month ago, and he just bought his first Atoms. He's like, oh great, like, I'm gonna like, I'm gonna do this domain name thing. He probably doesn't have the doesn't have the understanding of crypto to recognize the tax risks, the security risks, the personal sovereignty, sort of personal privacy risks that's associated with tying your online identity, which may be sort of closely tied to your own identity, sort of doxed, with an on-chain identity. And so that's another issue with identity, is like, not only do we not have good mechanisms for ensuring civil resistance without tying things to people's real identities, but beyond that, we don't have the right tools to allow that to exist with privacy. So if we had some kind of like zero knowledge thing, and I'm not actually, there's I could have asked this on that podcast, but right now Epicenter is being recorded with Anna Rose from the Zero Knowledge podcast about like the future of zero knowledge, and I would have loved to ask her this question. But if there's a way to basically have addresses to which you can only send funds, but you don't know actually what's going on behind there, that would be pretty terrific, I'd say, in terms of at least solving that privacy problem. Um, yeah, I think
Yeah.
those are like, I think identity and closely tied to that, civil resistance and also privacy are the big challenges that crypto is going to have to face in the next 1 to 2 cycles if it wants to get any kind of adoption. Um, it's really it's the HTTPS moment,
Hmm.
for crypto. There was a point with the internet where people started putting their credit cards online, and that became really dangerous. Uh, and HTTPS was invented, but this happened really early. This happened like mid '90s, right?
Hmm.
And sure, it was vulnerable, and like there were multiple um, iterations in order to make it secure. And now like HTTPS is everywhere, but up until like I think 2011, I want to say, most websites didn't have HTTPS, right? And it took Google and Chrome and a big flashy warning sign that
Yeah.
they basically forced on people, in order for the whole, like basically the entire industry to move to HTTPS. I don't know how that happens in crypto in the foreseeable future.
I don't know either. I think that we're a lot farther away from that than maybe you think we are. I don't really know.
Oh no,
But
I think it's quite far. Yeah, I think it's. I think that probably we'll see. Probably in this cycle, we'll see the first. We'll see the real, like, first real at scale privacy networks um, basically go live and in production. So there's things like Penumbra, Anoma, um, the ZKVM stuff, right?
Mhm.
But it won't be until the next cycle that that stuff really gets picked up and integrated in the entire ecosystem, at least. So we're probably looking at 3 to 5 years until we have real usable privacy solutions, and that's just on the privacy side. That's not on the identity side. I think that's to some extent maybe an even harder problem.
Oh yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
I'd say the last problem that I see, or actually perhaps maybe even a more prescient problem, is um, being able to purchase real world items in crypto. I think that
Oh yeah.
like it's not really a problem in and of itself, but I think a lot of people would like to avoid the tax hit of exiting crypto. Like if you live in Europe or some places in Europe,
Yeah.
so long as you don't go to fiat, you're fine. Um, I mean, it would be amazing if you just pay in USDC or ETH or whatever for a
You
product.
can do that. You can do it on Gnosis.
What do you mean?
Oh, so you'll have to listen to my interview with Federica last week. But basically, they have this product on Gnosis Chain. I think it's still kind of in beta, but where you have this debit card, or this kind of Visa debit card. Um, the card itself is a hardware wallet, so the chip on the card holds your seed phrase. When you go to a payment terminal, um, there's and this happens in seconds. There's a transaction that sells your stable coins for euros or dollars on the spot. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like one of these where you have to sell first and then put it in this kind of, here's the money that's on my credit card, like so many other blockchain or Bitcoin or credit cards. It sells it on the spot. And if the merchant accepts USDC and they have a partnership with this payment terminal company, if the merchants accept USDC, it bypasses the Visa network and they get USDC directly.
What if they don't have?
So so if they don't have it, you just pay with Visa. Like if you don't have it, you pay, and it sells your crypto for dollars or euros, and then they get dollars or euros just as they would with any other credit card. But if they accept USDC and the payment terminal recognizes that they do, it bypasses the Visa network and you pay with your card and they get USDC.
That's sick.
That's
Wow.
fucking cool. Yeah,
That's
I know.
really cool. Holy shit.
Yeah. So they have it sort of as a prototype right now, but they're going to be rolling it out. Yeah, it's super cool.
Is there a hardware component for? I mean, I'll listen to the podcast, but
no, but basically no. I mean, like you have a credit card and you get to pay at anywhere where you pay with Visa. But if that merchant happens to use this payment terminal that accepts USDC, which for the moment, probably isn't very many, but they'll probably, what happens here is that payment terminal then can offer it as an option. So like if you're, Patrick's fucking baked goods on the corner or whatever, you can say, hey, I can accept USDC, and then anybody who comes and uses that credit card will just pay you in USDC directly.
That's amazing. So you need the point of sale to be able to accept USDC, but that's like, I mean,
yes,
whatever. I mean, it'll get there at some point.
I mean, I think it's just still cool, like technically, that they were able to use. I did an interview with Stefan in Berlin a couple months ago, which is on the channel, where basically he explains how this works, and it's they're using, so there's like arbitrary messages. Like Visa protocol has these messages that it sends and whatever, and like there's like a message payload that they're leveraging in order to do this, and like it's kind of getting deep into like Visa protocol stuff, but I think it's kind of interesting.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So sick.
Anyway, I think we'll end it there. Go watch that episode if you want to learn more about that. It's last week's episode. You, Patrick, but also anybody who's watching or listening. And yeah, thanks for coming on. Great chatting, and I always love chatting about this stuff with you. So
Me too.
it's good to get you on the channel, and we'll have to come again, and we'll have to get Sharon to come on too, because I also like chatting with him about this stuff. So
yeah, he's got some interesting ideas.
yeah,
for sure.
so
Thanks for having me on.
yeah, of course. Merry Christmas to you and the fam, and also to everybody who's listening. Happy holidays. This is the last episode before Christmas, so hopefully I'm trying to get a sort of panel together next week with maybe 4 or 5 people, like a state of cosmos, kind of like wrapping up the year right before New Year's live stream. So hopefully we'll make that happen. If not, we'll be back in January to kick off the new year with more interesting content. So thanks for joining, and we'll see you very soon.